everybody, I am Bryan Grossman, Editor-in-Chief of the Colorado Springs Independent. This is the Indy 15, the weekly show that recaps what you need to know about the news. Our guest in studio today is Nick Raven. He's a fellow here at the Indy, and he's going to be discussing next week's cover story, which is the nerd issue. Nick, welcome to the Indy 15.
Thank you. I've always wanted to be here.
All right. I think you're here a lot, but thank you for at least coming downstairs.
Excellent.
So I've been with the Indy a little over 3 years now, and I don't think we've ever done a nerd issue. I think it's important, though, that we establish your bona fides before we get into any of this, because you sort of led this project. So how long have you been a nerd?
So hang on. So I'm 38 years old, so I'm going to say probably 38 years.
Okay.
When I wrote my blast initially, I was like, I think I'd already seen Star Wars before I was even born. So I can't quite comment on when that just kind of entered my mind. It's kind of Darth Vader was always, Luke's dad.
Yeah.
Just kind of always knew that. The first movie I remember seeing in theaters was Back to the Future.
Okay.
The original.
Which is a cool nerd movie.
That is a really cool nerd
Right,
movie. It's
yeah.
not as good as 3.
Okay.
3 is my favorite of the 3.
I would argue, but go ahead.
Sure. That's another episode.
You're right.
But Star Trek, Star Wars, everything, the internet, science fiction, not fantasy so much, but I totally I respect the group. And I didn't get into anime, but I'm into totally nerdy games. Video games, just really my thing. So understanding how those work. So a lot of technical know-how. And my dad just really liked really bad science fiction movies.
Okay.
So
do you have any titles you want to throw out there?
Saturn V.
Okay.
Howard the Duck.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I know. Right, exactly. Yeah. So
80s.
Yeah. Leah Thompson right before her career ended.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right. That might have done it, actually.
But yeah, Spaceballs is a great movie.
Yep.
So every Star Trek movie, every Star Wars movie.
So anything with star or space in the title.
Yeah, even some of the bad ones, like Star Hunter, which was a Harold Ramis, but anyway, but like that early 80s garbage.
That movie too.
Yeah, Star Chaser, The Legend of Orrin, which was an animated movie. There's so much star junk in the 80s.
All right. Your piece, though, had nothing to do with stars, right?
Yes.
For this.
It mentioned celebrities, but not stars.
But not like the space stars.
Not the gaseous. Actually, I think I did make an allegory to the brightest stars in reference to smaller conventions.
Right.
Because when you go to, have you been to a Comic-Con?
I haven't.
Okay. All right. So when you go to the bigger Comic Cons, they usually attract like the headliners, like the Will Wheatons or the
Shatners.
The Shatners, exactly. Still. He's got to pay his bills.
Yeah,
I don't have to begrudge him. But 1 year in Phoenix, they had Adam West, Burt Ward, and Julie Newmar in a Batman panel from the '67 show. Nice. So that's the bigger shows, but then you get the smaller shows, and you get people who are not as big, but you've seen that celebrities really kind of take a kind of a market approach to all of it, because if you have 30 opportunities to go across the country and say charge for autographs and photos and stuff like that, like that's an extra paycheck. So a lot of actors have made big bucks, although with the pandemic that kind of slowed down and everything's kind of coming back up to that.
Yeah. So you talk about Comic-Con in
my segment,
your portion, right? But we have a few segments in here. What else do we have going on?
So we have Jessica McMullen did a segment about her favorite RPGs and board games. She's a really big fan of the White Wolf Publishing World of Darkness series and a couple of the modules that go along with it, because you can just add rules and characters and stuff like that, put them all together. But then she mentioned like the childhood games like Monopoly, like everyone remembers Monopoly, or the Landlord's Game, depending on who you're from. The Clue, Scrabble, stuff like that. Dustin Glatz, our art director, he's like, yo, I want to talk about anime rom-coms. And I'm like, go for it. Yeah. And so he did. And I don't know any of them personally, but I know what that's like to be like, there's 20 episodes of this. I'm going to go binge that for a while. And we got a couple others. I don't want to spoil the whole issue,
Okay.
but we've got some really cool segments for people who are deeply nerdy and people who aren't writers. So that was the thing is here we have this issue. We're trying to type all of these things out because it's a newspaper and not a video. But it was really cool for them to step up and say like, I'm going to write these words.
So, having been a nerd your entire life, but not a native to Colorado Springs, how does the nerdiness of Colorado Springs strike you? How nerdy are we?
I think so. There is a lot of it's like basement nerdery. It's kind of like the same with art, because
they're afraid to share, or they just don't know.
There's no. So actually, that's the thing I mentioned in my segment is that there's kind of a lack of venue. So there's the biggest convention here in the city was I want to say for the longest time was Galaxy Fest.
Okay.
And it was at the Antlers.
Yes.
But the Antlers has like 2 ballrooms, and then the rest of it kind of just spilled out into the hallways. It was very like awkward. And we don't have a convention center here outside of the Broadmoor. So when you do have these conventions, they're usually like the one ballroom that a hotel has, and then that's it. So there is nerdery here, but it's like, please, where do we gather? Where do we go for this? And there aren't really a whole lot of spots.
Yeah.
It's getting better. There's one venue at Chapel Hills. It used to be, I don't know, some department store. It was an Anchor. And it's both floors. It's just concrete padding. Yeah. So that's at least a space. But there's a couple of those around. I think it is just having a venue for nerds to be able to gather.
And there are some places where, like Kapow Comics and Coffee, is that right? Where and places where you can do role-playing games and that sort of thing around town?
Yeah. Actually, near me, there's Dungeons and Javas. And it's kind of like you can actually schedule times to go out and like just sit a play. Like here we have an open game of this. There's the Colorado Springs Board Game Club. They just celebrated their 9th anniversary, and they will meet every Saturday there from like 2 to 10. And so there are venues like that around town. There's a couple on the north end. I can't remember their names offhand, but they're there. But they usually have a space where like people can come with their card games, play games. We're just going to arrange stuff, maybe tournament style. And people bring in food, drink, whatever, and they just have a good time.
And you mentioned you like video games. Do you do the analog at all?
The old school?
Like the Dungeons and Dragons, the table, the analog.
The analog.
Not the digital, games.
In the past I have, but it's hard to wrangle those kinds of groups together, especially into old age like I am. You have to have a group, you have to have the game master, which our cover is actually portraying a game master behind a privacy screen.
Cool. By Dustin.
Yeah, by Dustin. Amazing illustration. He showed me an update just before the show started. I was like, you got it, buddy. Cool. It does. But you have to have a person who does those. Yeah. And then you have to have people who are regularly willing to show. And if you've ever had to arrange a social gathering, it gets hard. Yeah. It gets hard, and that's no different.
Especially consistently and in the time of COVID and all of that too, right?
Yeah.
Those things have probably taken a hit over the past. Well, maybe they. I've heard that board games and that sort of thing sort of had a resurgence during COVID because nobody could go out, but you had to hang out with people that you knew were safe.
Yeah, were vaccinated or boosted or stuff like that. And I imagine a lot of that actually went virtually too.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I know. I have friends who do the D&D, but they'll do it virtually. So they're sitting there on a Zoom call or something, and they're rolling their dice or whatever. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, this is what I did. I killed the goblin or whatever.
Easier to cheat that way, probably. But,
but then no one likes you. Yeah. They figure it out.
Good point. So when I was growing up, you didn't want to be a nerd. If somebody called you a nerd, it was a bad thing.
Even when I was growing up, that was still
we're
kind
not
of
that far apart. But there was sort of a I don't know, renaissance, if that's the word. Well, I mean, it had to be cool to be a nerd before for there to be a renaissance. So I guess it was just a change of perspective. When did that happen and why?
I think that was like 15, 20 years ago. I think of like the Battlestar Galactica reboot that came to sci-fi. Did you watch that?
No.
Okay. So let's talk about nerdery for a bit here. Okay. I think it's an aging thing, actually, because like my dad was, he was totally science fiction as well. He would watch the original Star Trek.
Yep.
I think mostly in syndication, but that was his time, and he was growing up in the hard sci-fi, like 2001 Kubrickian hard, like science, ships slowly rotating in space, snorefests. But I think what it is that when Star Wars came about and there was the fantasy and then there was the speed and the lightsabers and that, and we moved away from, the math and the science towards this thing that clearly cannot exist.
Not so fast.
Yeah, right. Yeah, not so
It's
fast.
a galaxy far away.
A long time ago, too.
Yeah.
Long time ago. But when those kids got older and they started making all the changes, that's when I think nerdery became more popular or more mainstream. So then you could have conventions where it's like, hey, do you want to talk about Star Wars? But like not exclusively online. They could do that. So I think it was like 15, 20 years ago, because you figure Star Wars was 77, 80, and then so that's 2000, 2005, they're 2025.
Yeah.
I think that's when that thing... It's the same thing with video games, right? Like video games used to be just the toy, the Nintendo or something like that. And that's just a sea change culturally.
Yeah. And maybe coincidentally, maybe not, the internet 20 years ago became kind of a thing. So.
Yeah. Actually, there was a show called Babylon 5, which kind of started the modern era of serialized, like every single episode is hooked together. And one of the things that he did, and even the creators of The Simpsons did, was they would go on IRC, not IRC, but like bulletin boards online, and they would chat with fans online. So some of the early episodes of The Simpsons and that, there are actually references to things that people were talking about on the internet in like 90 and 91 and 92 before AOL and all that stuff, and the endless summer of 93.
What is the endless summer of 93?
So there's this thing so there's this thing in internet culture where the earliest internet users were the people the kids went to college because they would have access to the internet, the mainframe, stuff like that. And so what happened is that in 93 over the summer you'd have people leave, and then in fall the new students would come in and get busy, and then over summer it would die again. So in 93 it started getting out to homes everywhere, and so people kept showing up, and it became the endless fall of 93. And then like 95, 96, you get AOL, Prodigy, all those mail discs that you were catching 4,500 free hours. And
you've got mail.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, when that started, the mid-90s, when that started getting keyword, Family Guy, or why would you want to watch that? But that's basically it. So yeah, those kind of went hand in hand. Hey, we're nerds, we're growing up, we have the internet, we can easily transmit this stuff.
Plus, nerds probably made the internet, which means that
it wasn't the dorks. It was the nerds.
It was the nerds, and so that was built in already from the beginning.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
had been a piece of it. Like we want to create this so we can talk about Star Trek.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, all right, so from noon to 4, we're going to invent the internet, and then from 5 to 9, we're going to play D&D.
Right, online.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or in person.
Right. I sent my first email when I was in college, so that was. That makes sense to me. I didn't even know what the internet was until...
I actually sent it over AOL. My dad was in Australia, and I emailed my dad in Australia. This was 95.
That must have taken forever.
No.
You could have hand-delivered it to Australia.
I hand-deliver an email. So it got to Sydney. They had to print it out. And then they had to fly a kangaroo over to my dad so that he could read it. Yeah.
We should have Helen, our managing editor from Australia, in on this conversation. But I think for
that's
later.
An episode.
Okay. So anything else you want to mention about the nerd issue? Nerdvanas? It's,
I think it's really exciting. It's got really cool... It's got a pseudo-narrative frame story that goes along with it that kind of guides you between the segments, and that was really fun because it's the Colorado Springs Independent nerd crew. And so they're on an adventure, and as they are adventuring, they are delivering these tales for their respective interests. Right. And I think the cool thing with Nirvana was being able to have all these different perspective things that I know about, things that I may know about, but I don't have, the fondness for, or something like that. Be able to have all those segments in the story. And that was really cool.
All right. Well, I want to say thank you to Nick Raven, who is our fellow and head nerd here at the Indy. Thanks for joining us in the studio. And to our audience, don't forget, pick up this week's paper. This is Turn Off the Damn Spigot. The West is dried out, but the Springs keeps building. Why doesn't the city mandate water conservation? This is out now. Nerd Issue comes out August 17th. It'll be available on newsstands and digitally through our website, csnd.com. Let us know what you think about both Turn Off the Damn Spigot. Let us know what you think about the Nerd Issue after next week, as well as our show, the Indy 15. And, head to our social media our social media site, csnd.com on Facebook. Is that right? Facebook. Well, we can edit
Facebook, Twitter. No, we're just going to keep going.
We're just going to keep going. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's on Facebook. You know the Facebooks.
Yeah.
So look for the Indy there and our stories. If you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. Don't forget to click that bell to get notifications whenever we post new videos. This show was produced by Dave Gardner and Nick Raven. Videocast was directed by Dave Gardner and distributed by our digital team made up of Sean Cassidy and Michaela Jones. Dustin Glatz is our art director. I'm editor-in-chief Bryan Grossman, and Amy Gillentine is our publisher. Be sure to join us next week for another episode of the Indy 15. Thanks, everybody.